Hi, my name is Hannah. Welcome back to Savage Reads. I have read some books that I have so many thoughts on. I am going to have a lot to say, so I'm excited to jump into that. But as has become customary the past few videos, I want to update you on some of my embroidery projects. So I finished the bonsai tree. So my favorite was I did a 7-strand braid to kind of be the trunk and then just like tacked it in the places I wanted. And then I did all the leaves and I don't know, I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. I really love it. And now I am doing a beautiful fall leaf scene from a nature picture that my sister took. And I don't know where it's going right now. It is going to be thousands of individual leaves. I don't know if I'm up for it, but so far, this is where I'm at. Getting kind of that fall leaves, but there's still some green, and I've got to fill that all in, and then I'll put some kind of brush and flowers in the front. So we'll see how it turns out, but I'm really excited about this one, even though it may take me a few weeks. At least I say that, and every time I think something's going to take me a long time, I can't stop thinking about it, and I end up getting it done in a week. I am taking this to my daughter's basketball practices. I'm taking this on car rides anytime I can. I'm throwing in some stitches. So that's where I'm at with my embroidery projects, and now let's jump into some of the books that I have read the past week. I haven't done one of these updates on what I've been reading to my daughters in quite a while because I've been stuck reading the longest, most boring book. I really disliked this. We read the last book in the His Dark Materials trilogy. We read The Amber Spyglass by Philip Pullman, and I don't know where this book was trying to go. It just went every sort of which way and dragged on. It took me ages to read this to my daughters, and honestly, I think the reason was I wasn't very excited about it. And so I wasn't like, oh yeah, in the car, let's read an extra chapter. I was so over this series by this book. It dragged on and on. And when I think about the book, I'm like, oh, Lyra being kidnapped, that was at the beginning. I thought that was in a previous book. It just kept dragging and dragging. It got weird with some of the aliens, and I didn't understand why it was necessary. It kind of seemed like an odd side plot that didn't really focus. I just think the book lacked a focus and a point. And I know a lot of people point to this as an atheist trilogy, and I think maybe the author wanted it to be, but I could not figure out for the life of me how any of it was atheist when it had talks of what happens in the afterlife and a great guiding force that helps everyone. And yeah, you can say, oh yes, this ruling entity is evil, but you still have God throughout the book. I couldn't figure out what the author was trying to say, and it had one of my least favorite things. It had the 12-year-olds falling in love, and it's deep, lasting love. Ew, they're 12. I don't care what's happened. That's kind of my ick with some books. So overall, hated it. I really liked The Golden Compass. I thought that was a really fun read. And The Subtle Knife, I was like, I'm not really feeling like the characterization is really working for me. I just don't know. And this last one killed it. Also, there were some characters that we were supposed to say, oh yes, they were redeemed by their love or whatever. No. Why are we saying that this was okay? I feel like there were some things that happened that just were never addressed right. I cannot figure out how this is the end of that series. I'm so bugged that I had to waste the past couple months of my life reading this out loud. I'm so glad to be done. I'm going to be starting reading out loud, hopefully, the trilogy from Garth Nix, the Sabriel, Lyriel, and Upharsin ones. I remember really liking those when I was maybe, don't know, 12 or 13, and I'm hoping they're not too old for my 8-year-old, but I do get complaints when she feels like a book isn't dark and scary enough, and I'm hoping that this has a little bit more of those elements, so we'll at least start that. I actually bought the physical copy and it should be here today, and so I can start reading that to my daughter and see if it's good. For me, I'm actually excited to reread it. I remember loving them, so crossing my fingers, they have held up over time, because the His Dark Materials series, ugh, I am kind of bummed out by that. It killed a lot of my enthusiasm, and I'm excited to get back into reading with my daughter in a more exciting way. So that is how reading with my girls is going, and let's go into some of the other books that I finished this week. So I made the mistake of picking up Underland, A Deep Time Journey by Robert Macfarlane, and this is supposed to be his wanderings through underground places, and I thought it sounded like an interesting nonfiction book, and it was an interesting nonfiction book when I could focus on it. But I thought, what is wrong with me? The writing seems beautiful. Everything seems fine, but I cannot for the life of me pay attention. My mind was just floating away, and then I'm like, oh yeah, the book. I could not pay attention. And I think my biggest problem with it is it just didn't have any sort of connecting thread. It just felt so wandering around, and you just never felt like you were getting any central idea or anything that you could grasp onto. And so while individually the little bits of, oh yes, this cave had this and this, might be interesting, and talking about storing nuclear waste and whatever, those might be interesting ideas, put all together, I could not focus on it. And I thought, this is my problem. This is probably a 5-star book. Why am I hating it? And then I went and looked up the author, and why did I do this to myself? Because I had also read The Old Ways, A Journey on Foot by Robert Macfarlane, once again thinking, oh, it's his talk about the history and his travels on some of the oldest paths through England, and that sounds really interesting. And I remember thinking, wow, I am bored out of my mind. For beautiful meditative writing, yeah, but for some reason, these don't work for me. These are not my books. I have read 3 books by this author, and I don't know why. I thought I should pick up another one when I was bored. Anyways, I read his book of poems, which was probably the one that caught my attention the most, The Lost Spells, but these 2 nonfiction books, ugh, so boring. And it's just frustrating when you feel like it's an interesting subject and the writing is good. Why can't it keep my attention? But when it's happened twice, I am starting to feel like it's not a me problem, it is the author problem, or at least that this author is not for me, because I just think that he doesn't have enough of a connecting thread and a really central theme, and it just wanders around. And so if you like really slow, meditative books where you can think about things and the writing's lovely, sure. But if you get bored by things like that sometimes, don't pick up a Robert Macfarlane book. I was just really frustrated with myself reading this book, being so bored. So overall, I don't really recommend it. If you like this kind of book, you have a lot more patience than I do, because for me, I have no ability to sit through this kind of book. So Sue Jackson on her booktube channel recommended the book In the Garden of Beasts, Love, Terror, and an American Family in Hitler's Berlin. And this is by Erik Larson. Now, I had read a couple books by Erik Larson before, and there is one that is on my list that I've heard so many people talk about, The Demon of Unrest, I believe it's called. And I am really excited to get to that one. But I have read 2 other books. I read Dead Wake, The Last Crossing of the Lusitania, and I read The Devil in the White City, Murder, Magic, and Madness at the Fair That Changed America. So I knew that I would get probably a pretty solid book going into this, and I wasn't disappointed. I really enjoyed it. I think this might be one of my favorite Erik Larson books that I have read so far. I think the focus was a really interesting one. It was the family that was in Germany in 1933 as the ambassador for the United States. You get William Dodd, you get his perspective, and then you also get his daughter's perspective as she's going out to parties and dating and trying to enjoy her time and watching as things start escalating. And so I thought that it was an interesting perspective. I do think it was a bit of a narrow focus in that it was this family, and to be fair, it was mostly the dad and the daughter. We don't hear a ton about the wife. It's really mostly the daughter, all of her affairs and her fun that she had, and as she started to realize that, no, things are not going so great here. And so I think it was a really interesting book, very compelling. I wanted to get to the end, but after going through, rating this 5 stars, really enjoying it, I read some of the funniest reviews on Goodreads. So I thought I would share some of them because, while I recommend it, I thought it was great, these were just too good to pass up. So one review says, picture Principal Skinner from The Simpsons and Paris Hilton going to Nazi Germany, and you'll have a pretty good idea of what this book is like. And fair, 100% fair. And the other review that made me laugh out loud was, want to know what it would be like to try to talk Satan out of being such a dick? Consider reading In the Garden of Beasts. And that was spot on. I enjoyed this book. I thought it was really interesting and had a very interesting perspective. I do think maybe it focused a little too much on Martha, the daughter, but overall it was very interesting. So highly recommend. So I had one of my very good friends recommend the book Wellness by Nathan Hill. This book is following a couple and their marriage, and we get when they meet and flashbacks, but we also get current day where they're trying to move into a new home. They have a son that has some difficulties, and they're trying to figure out where their marriage goes from here. And I wasn't too sold on it going into it. I don't know about you, but sometimes reading these books about people getting these like, oh, a midlife crisis, just, it feels very privileged, and so I wasn't too sure getting into this, but I heard such good reviews from my friend, and so I have to pick this up, and this book ended up being really interesting. At first, I really did think, oh, do I have to read this? I just want to quit. But no, she told me to read it, and I'm going to read it so I can talk about it. And I think the reason I was off put by it is I found the characters to be somewhat unlikable, mostly because I just wanted them to talk to each other, have discussions, chat about this, be really open in what you need in the relationship, and talk about it. And I think that feeling that frustration, it actually paid off really well, because you could see as the story went on what was causing this inability to communicate. And I thought that it was really well done. At times the book felt a little meandering because it went through so many different times in life and kind of had moments of feeling almost preachy, like here are different vignettes on art or social media or life, and it felt like maybe that was just a little much. But then as it comes together, it really brought a lot of meaning into it. So overall, I really recommend it. I think this would be a great book club book. So some of the topics that it talked about were the stories that we tell ourselves, like the placebo effect. What do we believe, and how does that influence our lives? How do our stories change over time as we grow? We might tell ourselves a specific story as we first meet somebody. It's our how we met, but that changes over time based on how you tell it and how you remember it. And while I was frustrated at the lack of communication sometimes, my friend pointed out it is such an interesting discussion between the difference in our expressed lives and our interior lives, and how things appear so different depending on our life's experiences and how we feel comfortable sharing. And it did have some really relatable things about the struggles of modern parenting and the different messages that we receive and how we incorporate those into our lives. I feel like these characters were really trying to find meaning and belonging through external factors in their lives. And it was really frustrating for me, feeling like you need to have a stronger sense of self and have a story that is something that you can cling on to throughout life, that isn't going to change with every new challenge that comes up. And I think that the book slowly got there, right? So while I felt those frustrations going through the book, like, oh, why aren't they doing this? I think as it all came together and all these various flashbacks and stories came together, you start understanding where they are, and they start understanding what kinds of stories they want to have meaning in their lives. Overall, I highly recommend this book, but it's not a perfect book. I won't say it is 5-star, the perfect book. I think there were things that kind of bothered me about some of these characters and some of the plot points that were picked up and dropped off, just the characters that were coming in. I'm like, wait, that happened? What are the ramifications of that? And then we drop it. There were some things plot-wise that didn't seem super realistic to me, but the discussion of life that went throughout this book, I thought was so interesting. I recommend just for the ability to provoke thought, and especially if you have a book club or you want something that is going to give you a little bit to consider, I think that this book does a really good job. Are there different things in there that might bother you? Yes, but I think that the author kind of brings it all together by the end. And so at the beginning, didn't love it. By the end, I think it really came together well, and I appreciated that I'd felt those feelings of frustration at the lack of communication, at struggle with why they don't have confidence in who they are, and understanding where they came from throughout the book as it came together in the end, I thought was really well done. And that is what I have read the last week or so. If you have thoughts on any of these books, let me know in the comments down below, and I will see you all on the next one.